Okay, hello and welcome. Um, I realized that the notification for the challenge set review uh, went out maybe a little too close to the actual date of the challenge set, so I thought it'd be easier for everyone's schedule if we just recorded a quick review session, then you can watch it in your own time and reach out to me with any questions or concerns about the spring challenge set this year. So, as usual, talk about who we are. These are all the labs that participated in the challenge set. Where they are, there were 13 total participants this year, but not every lab participated in every challenge set, if that makes sense. So there were 13 total this year from east to west. Excuse me. These are the biochemicals we're working with. Everybody does gram stains and catalase. Which is good. And then oxidase and beta-lactamase are next two most prominent tests. So these are, the big four that will get you the furthest as far as ruling out most of our organisms. And so we'll jump into number one. 52-year-old man, poorly controlled diabetes, 5 days of fever, chills, weakness, confusion, exposure to wet soil through landscaping, and a cut on his forearm. On admission, it was febrile, hypertensive, tachycardic, labs showing leukocytosis and signs of sepsis. So we had blood cultures that went positive at approximately 36 hours. So blood culture goes positive. Here, maybe from the direct culture. I know there's no cellular debris in there, but this is what we saw first. Our gram stain here. Let me see. So how did we call this? As a group, we unanimously voted that this was gram negative, and most agreeing that this is a gram negative rod. Kind of long, uh, very large, too big probably for regular coccobacilli or diplococci. So most agree that this was a gram negative rod. Now let's look at the plate growth. Mostly everyone agreed that we had growth on all three, the blood, the chocolate, and the MAC. Here's our chocolate, growing pretty well. 24 hours, blood, same. And the MacConkey. Pretty good growth in the MacConkey. 48 hours, again with the MacConkey. So if we were suspecting that this might be one of our BT organisms, probably it'd be a little slower growing than what we're seeing. But there's only two gram negative rods on our list, so we would either be looking for Burkholderia pseudomallei or Yersinia pestis. So let's continue back to our plate growth. We said we had non-hemolytic growth on the blood plate. I'm inclined to agree with that. And then a lactose non-fermenter on the MacConkey. We had two labs saying lactose fermenter. I think there is a little bit of coloration, but it's not like the deep pink color change that you would see when there's actual lactose fermentation going on that. So I would call this a lactose non-fermenter as well. And if we're following along with our algorithms, there's only 2 gram negative rods, and there's only one test that can really separate these out for us. If you look at the top up here, that oxidase test is going to immediately rule out one of these because Burkholderia pseudomallei is oxidase positive and Yersinia pestis is oxidase negative. So that's where we're going to start. The laboratories, we had, it's like 11 labs, did the oxidase test and got a positive oxidase. One got a negative and one lab did not perform the oxidase test. We also had one lab who doesn't have the oxidase available. So hopefully that was our non-performer. So here's the results we had at NPHL. You can see some slight color change on our test on the right, and then looks similar to our positive control on the left. So we would say that this is oxidase positive. So that's going to rule out Yersinia pestis and leave us with Burkholderia pseudomallei as one of our gram-negative rods. So then we would go through the rest of our tests: catalase, indole, motility. There's some additional optional testing down at the bottom there, but we don't really cover that in this review. So going with the catalase, most had catalase positive. Here was the NPHL's results. I see some pretty good bubbles in there comparing to our positive control on the left. I'd say that's catalase positive. Then the indole, looking for a negative indole test. How did we do? We had about 5 labs who did the indole got a negative indole. And then those other 8 labs not performing indole. Here's what we had, which is a negative indole, so we are checking the boxes. Finally, a tube motility. Tube motility at 35 is the one I'm looking at here. So we had 5 labs perform the tube motility, and we kind of had mixed results. Here was our tube motility test at NPHL. You can see some, laser pointed back out, some diffuse growth kind of on the edges there, whereas the negative test, it's really confined just to that inoculation streak there. Some bubbles in the positive control, and some growth away from that inoculation streak, which, so I think it's easier to see kind of up here at the top, which is what we saw. So I would be calling this a positive motility test. And if you look at our rule out, Burkholderia pseudomallei would also be positive for motility. So how did we respond? 6 of us said non-BT culture. If we were going along biochemically, what we were looking for is unable to rule out Burkholderia pseudomallei. I know with some good growth on the first day, we can probably rule it out, but biochemically, this was Burkholderia thailandensis, and it is very similar to Burkholderia pseudomallei. So we had 6 labs unable to rule out Burkholderia. And then we had the 1 lab on the oxidase test who called it negative, and that's probably where we're getting that Yersinia pestis from. So that's challenge set 1, Burkholderia thailandensis. Challenge set 2, 50-year-old woman with no significant past medical history, 3 days of fever, dyspnea. She was handling raw animal materials at a processing facility, denied any obvious injuries aside from small painless lesion on her forearm. There's a typo there. That had not initially been noticed. On examination, febrile, non-tender ulcerated skin lesion and swabs of lesion were collected and sent to the lab. So when they did a direct gram stain on those swabs, here's what they saw. So this one's pretty straightforward. We immediately know what we're looking for. How did we call the gram stain? We called it mainly gram positive, 2 labs calling gram negative. And I want to point out here that oftentimes when we're dealing with these, large gram positive rods, they do have a tendency to decolorize pretty easily. So just be mindful of that. But the size of these things is also what you're looking at, not just the gram reaction, because they're large and boxy. So if you're seeing mainly gram negative, but they're that big, maybe try a second stain. Everyone agreed that these are rods, and then most of us agreed that it was gram positive. And so lots of growth on the blood and the chocolate, not a lot of growth on the MAC. 1 lab reporting growth on MAC. Actually, if I remember correctly, I think we had 1 lab who got this and the next one mixed up. So we'll see maybe a couple discrepant results, and I think that's because they reported them opposite. Here's our day one growth, growing pretty well at 24 hours. Zero growth on the MacConkey. 48 hours, still growing quite well. So gram-positive bacilli, the only one on our list is Bacillus anthracis, causative agent of anthrax. So on our plate growth, we had non-hemolytic. That's one of our looking points. MacConkey growth, we just had the one lab said that it was a lactose fermenter, but here's 48 hours, still no growth. So we're looking for a large gram-positive rod. That's non-hemolytic, growing well at 24 hours. So that's gonna move us to our next page of our trigger point. So then the two tests we're looking at today, tube catalase, motility. How did we do on the catalase? So we had, was that 9 labs reporting catalase positive, 1 catalase negative, and 3 labs didn't run it. Here was what we saw at the NPHL, very catalase positive. It's almost, it's just like the positive control. Be sure if you look in the negative, how much organism I've got in there, be sure you're using enough to get a result that, is indicative of the organism that you're looking at. So it's tube catalase positive. Now, this is where if it's morphologically similar and it's catalase positive, this is where most labs can get away with just stopping and calling it Bacillus anthracis and calling it in. It might actually be preferred that way because I know the REML motility can be tough to interpret. So if you are unsure about the motility, just call it in. It's better to be safe than sorry. But speaking of motility, that's our next test. So motility at 35, we had 1 positive, 4 negatives, and 8 not performed. Here's what we saw. So similar to the last one, that Burkholderia, you see a lot of growth, especially again, easier kind of to see up here, like diffusing out, kind of clouding that background. A lot of bubbles going down the streak, and it's just a little bit cloudier on the outside. I know my streak's kind of off to the side there. Like our positive control, whereas our negative control, it's really confined just to that inoculation streak there. Oops. So we are calling this positive. Tube motility at 35 degrees positive. So that it would then, rule out our anthrax, which is tube motility negative. So if we have a look at what we're doing here, remember we had the 8 labs who did not do the motility and 1 lab who got a positive or a negative result. So that would lead us to have 8 labs then, which according to their own test results, did the right thing. And then we have the non-BT culture. Anthrax is the only thing that can be ruled out by colony morphology. You're looking for that ground glass, those comma-like projections, and then that tenacity when you try to pick it up off the plate, like meringue or whipped eggs, beaten eggs. So that was number 2. The organism was Bacillus megaterium. Good job. So that one, if you look at the worksheet, I scored it because not every lab has motility available. So if you didn't have motility, you were probably calling it unable to rule out Bacillus anthracis. And then if you got, if you did have the motility, you're more likely to be able to complete that rule out. So, but everyone, I think, came up with the correct answer based on their own testing. So good job. Okay, finally, 28-year-old man, no significant past medical history. 4 days of fever, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. The pain was localized to the right lower quadrant. Nausea, concern for appendicitis. He recently ate undercooked pork. Febrile with local abdominal tenderness. Blood cultures were collected, became positive within 24 to 48 hours. So here's our gram stain from uh, blood culture if we're using our imaginations. So compared to our first gram stain, that Burkholderia thailandensis, these are a lot smaller, not as long. One might even say short, plump. Let's see how we scored it. Everyone agreed that this was gram negative, but then we had some separation on the interpretation of the morphology, with most labs calling this a coccobacilli, and 4 labs calling this a bacilli, 1 lab calling it a diplococcus. So if we go back and look at this, I know these are a lot shorter than the first gram stain we looked at, but they're still much larger than a coccobacilli. These, I think, generally are described as short, plump, gram-negative rods. I mean, you see some of them do get rather long. I know, like, this is a short little one. This might even be considered maybe the size of like a cocci, but they're still quite large when compared to like a Haemophilus or, Francisella. So these are, I'd still consider to be gram-negative rods. Um, and then another thing about gram-negative rods is they grow on MacConkey, whereas our gram-negative coccobacilli do not. So most labs reported growth on the MacConkey plate for this organism. So another indication that you're probably dealing with a gram-negative rod instead of a gram-negative coccobacilli. So here's our growth at day 1, blood growing on the MacConkey. Growth at day 2, still growing on the MacConkey. So we're going back to our gram-negative rods, our 2 that we dealt with at the top, Burkholderia pseudomallei and Yersinia pestis. Everyone agreed that this was a non-hemolytic gram-negative rod, and we all agreed this time that this was not a lactose fermenter. So similar to the first one, you see a little bit of discoloration with the growth, but not like lactose fermentation discoloration. So we start here again, our 2 gram negatives. We're going to do the oxidase test, which this time we've got a pretty solid agreement that this was negative, which I agree with. So that's going to leave us with our Yersinia pestis. And then just like the Burkholderia, we're going to go down the line, catalase, indole, urease. So we got the catalase, mostly positive. I agree with that. The indole, we said, for those who performed it, was unanimously negative. Here's what I got in the lab, was a positive indole test, which at that point would have ruled out Yersinia pestis. And then there were 6 labs who did the urease, maybe instead of the indole, and maybe stopped there because this was urease positive and our organism is urease negative. And I apologize, I don't have a picture of the urease test for this organism. I don't know. I used to. I don't know what happened to it. And so this was Yersinia enterocollitica. So now Yersinia pestis, that urease and that indole test were our 2 big indicators. We had majority of labs calling non-BT culture, which was the answer we were looking for. And then if you remember, we had some labs calling this a coccobacilli instead of a gram-negative rod, which will then set you down that Burkholderia mallei. But the thing about Burkholderia mallei is it does not grow very well on a MacConkey, so maybe that would be leading you away from that gram-negative coccobacilli. So anyway, that's all 3 of our challenge sets that went out. Thank you everybody for participating. Sorry it took so long to get this review together. Like I said, I had some other things to do for the state ahead of the World Cup. But I will be available for questions by email, or if you want to give me a call, no problem. Thanks.